The path of an artist is full of challenges, which has pushed me to reach out to other professionals about their experiences. Join us as we explore the journeys of fine artists who have turned their passion of creating art into a profession. From their highs to their hurdles, these are real insights, breakthroughs, and triumphs to inspire other creators to reach higher. Welcome to the Business of Art podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Business of Art podcast. Today we are honored and thrilled to have TJ Cunningham, or as he goes by his friends and family and other people, Tim. I'll be calling him Tim through the interview. But so glad to have you on the podcast today, Tim.
Good to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, I'm just going to read off a little bit of the bio points about him, and basically we'll just jump right into his journey after that. So Tim, he grew up in Cambridge, Vermont, and his inspiration has always come from landscapes around that area, small farms, wooded hills, shallow streams. He actually has a really incredible family heritage with a lot of artists. Those artists include William Trost Richards, Francis Davis Millett, Kathleen McEnery, and his grandfather, Michael Cunningham. Their paintings have inspired the possibility of a career as an artist for him since he was young. He studied art with oil painter and illustrator Brian Jekyll at the Pensacola Christian College with a very strong focus on representational painting. He began his professional painting career immediately after he graduated in 2010, and he's been recognized as an emerging artist in Southwest Art's 21 Under 31 article in 2014. And little side note, I was also recognized in the same article the same year. So it's kind of cool that this is kind of coming full circle a little bit. He's also won awards from the Plein Salon, the Portrait Society of America, the Art Renewal Center, and Oil Painters of America. He is married and he has 4 children, and they currently live in Pensacola, Florida. So Tim, again, thank you so much for being here. We really want to just jump in and hear your story. We'd love to hear the journey of how art started for you. It sounds like it started when you were little, and even with your heritage. But let's get into some of the details and how it evolved and up till now. We want to hear it all.
So everything from the beginning.
well, that's relevant.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I was always very creative, and that's just how I relate to the world. So if I was interested in something, I had almost no interest or ability to read about it. I just wanted to draw pictures of it, right? So that's way, 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 way back. And my parents recognized that and cultivated it, definitely. And I didn't really think of myself as wanting to be an artist or thinking that I was going to be an artist. And of course, there was art around me. And there was sort of, you mentioned my grandfather was a painter, and that got talked about a lot. And I think that had an influence, but mostly I think the huge sort of turning point for me, and it's not on the website. And so this is the kind of information you only get on podcasts like this.
Yeah.
Is I was a dishwasher at a little diner near where I lived, right? Which, is probably not the worst job I ever had, but it was pretty bad. Like, I hated it. I wasn't very good at it. The only reason they didn't fire me is because they liked me. Because I wasn't very good at it. And I had this sculpture of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which I was very proud of. And I brought it and showed it to my coworkers, and the boss was like, well, we should put it on display, see if somebody buys them. I'm like, okay. So put it out by the cash register, and it's a little tiny diner in the middle of nowhere, right? That's where it was. And somebody bought it right away for $100, which when you're making, I can't remember how much I was making, but it wasn't very much washing dishes. It was like, whoa, hey. And to me, like, that was the barrier. Like, man, if I can sell this now, surely I can have a successful career as an artist, right? So that was like all I needed for that leap of faith to be like, well, I don't know. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was 17. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to study art. And you mentioned Pensacola Christian College. They sent a promotional DVD that shared some information about their program, and they just showed representational paintings that had been painted well.
Yeah.
And I, at the time, was, on the computer looking at brochures for state schools and, state colleges, even some of the more prestigious art schools back in 2000, I guess like 2004, 2005, you certainly are not seeing any pictures of well executed representational paintings. At least
Right.
I wasn't. It was all stuff that I didn't understand, I wasn't interested in. And I definitely have always wanted to do representational work at some level. So I
Yeah.
saw those paintings and I'm like, this must be the only place on earth left where they'll teach you how to paint like this. And of course, I didn't know about, Grand Central and all the ateliers that are around New York City. And, obviously there are lots of places teaching representational art, but I didn't have, because I was so far outside of that world, had no idea that any of those things even existed. So
Yeah.
packed my bags and went down to Florida. And, it was a Bachelor of Science degree. So it wasn't an art school at all. And definitely, broadened interests and different skills needed to survive, I think, as a professional artist, not just learning how to draw and paint. But after that, I graduated 2010, which was the middle of the Great Recession, if you
Right.
recall, right? It wasn't a great time to be doing anything.
Right.
And I had a show in a town near where I'm from, Middlebury, Vermont, and sold 60% of the paintings in the show, which is again just this huge confirmation. It's like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then I leaped into it, and that's when the going got rough, like just trying to figure out how to be a professional artist and work with galleries. And man, that's when the School of Hard Knocks began session in earnest. So
Yeah. So
but I kind of,
quick question. Were you, when you went to college, were you married? Did you like, what was your status as far as marriage at that point?
yeah, no, I was single when I was
Okay.
18. I met my wife, Julie, it was my junior year, her sophomore year, or maybe it was my senior year, her junior year, but she still had a year left.
Okay.
And then, so we got married in 2011. I graduated 2010, married in 2011. So
Okay.
she's really been, with me through it all.
Yeah.
We've been together through it all. She's an artist as well, or at least studied art. She doesn't like it when I say she's an artist, but she's very creative and, really knows what she's talking about, knows what she's looking at with paintings too. So
That's awesome.
we spent a lot of time in art museums and galleries and of course the studio.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good sort of how I got to the point where I was a professional, so to speak.
Yeah. From then till now, what has that looked like? I would love to still hear more.
Yeah, so it was a decade. I guess it hasn't. It's been 14 years.
Yeah.
But it's kind of from graduation to COVID. COVID's going to always be that sort of fork in the road. I know it was for a lot of people,
Right.
and maybe civilization as a whole. It's an interesting time to live through. And so I just did the gallery thing for that decade and created artwork. And I think right before COVID started, it was up to 5 or 6 galleries.
Okay.
And, was sending each of them work, some of them really good galleries. I was working with, some of the galleries that I had wanted to be in, and I was showing with artists that I had always wanted to show with. So I think it was reasonably successful. But then when the pandemic started, I, having come to the art world in sort of the echo of the Great Recession, thought it's going to happen again, right? And there's sort of that panic, because I remember because you hang out with all these cool old artists and they're talking about the galleries that went under and never paid their artists, or never sent the artwork back, or all sorts of nightmare stories. So I just sort of was like, I got to get all of my artwork back. I got to get it back, because all these places, they're all in New England, and everything's closing. And then I'm getting all these emails from the galleries assuring me that they're going to redouble their efforts to market online. And I just remember sort of, one of those light bulb moments where, like, well, the reason I'm paying you is because you have a storefront in this nice town, this nice city where people walk through and buy art. Yeah. If we're going to both just be online, why do I still need you? Right. Yeah. And that was kind of that was one of the breaking points. And right around then, I had a mentor who had coached businesses in other walks of life, you should say, other kinds of businesses, never art, but just some basic entrepreneurial principles that, again, I was just completely unfamiliar with. And he gave me some really solid advice and some coaching on how to start reorienting how I was thinking about selling art, right? And which led pretty quickly to the realization that if you're in that position where you're paying someone to be your agent, but you're not getting any of the customer information, and you're paying them an awful lot of commission on sale, just not a good deal for you if you can find some other way to connect with people who are interested in your work. So, I kind of, by June of 2020, I left all the galleries completely permanently. I haven't been back, and some of them I have great relationships with, some of the gallerists still, right? So there's no bad blood. I was just talking to one on the phone the other day. But we can't afford to do business with each other, because I want customers and I don't want to pay anybody commission. It's just how it is. And so that's 2020 to 2024. I'm kind of halfway through this next decade of my career. Hopefully I make it a whole nother decade. And I'm still painting really similar things to the things that I was painting before. For a little while, right at the beginning, I was trying to be a portrait artist. And I just kind of, one step at a time, lost interest in the idea of trying to be a portrait artist. And have taken up painting animals to sort of keep that, drawing, getting the highlight in something's eyes, getting the sort of the living essence of another creature in my paintings. And I'm way, way happier doing that than trying to paint, a likeness of someone. I have, I have far fewer existential crises when I'm painting animals than I did when I was painting portraits. So and so I paint animals, I paint landscapes, and man, I think that's everything from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Flyby.
I love that experience that you shared initially, when you were 17 and you had a sculpture of a T-Rex.
Yeah. Did not take any pictures of it. So it's probably the best piece of art I've ever created, because there's no documentation.
And you don't know who has it, right?
I wasn't there when it sold, and they didn't leave their name. They just left money.
Man. And they probably don't know who you are.
My guess is that they don't, right? So
that's hilarious.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, that's incredible. And anyway, I love that. I think it's crazy what what little moments or little things have such a big significant impact at the beginning of an artist's life. You know, I don't know why, but I always look back. I was in second grade, and I was doing this craft project with my class, and we had to make paper cutout scarecrows, and I drew this circle on a piece of paper to cut out for the head of the scarecrow, and my teacher was like, "Wow, Mark, that's a really good circle," you know, and I was like, "Yeah, it is. Like, I got this," you know, and but it lit my fire, you know, and it really kind of springboarded me into being like, I'm a good artist for some reason, you know, and it's crazy, those little things that just make a massive difference.
Well, it's, you know, and I teach too, and absolutely have observed that believing that you can is way, way, way more important than knowing how.
I love
right?
that.
So,
Yeah. Yep.
you know, if you don't believe that you can, even if you know how, you still won't. But if you believe that you can, you're going to find out how, right? You're going to find a school, you're going to find a podcast, you're going to find a YouTube channel, and you're going to learn how to mix color. You just have to believe that you can, right? So I think that's the thing that so many people really need, that because it can be so discouraging, right? So anyway, believing that you can, and definitely having that, you know, just that selling that T-Rex was more pivotal, and it was Sculpey, right? It was nothing.
Right.
It was way, way, way more pivotal for me than anything I learned in college, right?
Yeah.
Because I went to college because I believed that I could.
Yeah. So was it at that point that you had that mental shift that you believed that you could do it? Was that the turning point?
That was it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You know, I think, I can't remember where I heard it recently. I listened to a lot of stuff, but our identity is so important to our success. And I think that when we have decided that I'm an artist, like we make that decision, like when I describe myself, or even just like, I remember when I was I think it was high school, and I was pretty much like I'm going to do art for the rest of my life. I'm an artist. And even though I didn't know if could make money with it or make a living with it. I just knew it was going to be in my life. And honestly, I was planning to be a dentist for a while. I'm so glad that didn't happen. But yeah, when you have that decision in your head, that switch turns where it's part of who you are, it almost doesn't matter what the barriers are at that point, because it's like, but this is who I am, and I'm going to figure it out. And I've just got to figure it out. And maybe that's a year or two down the road, or 5, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out because it's just who I am. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think that that's a massive shift for people if they want to be successful and they don't really believe in themselves. I think you're right. Like they're almost, I don't know if hopeless is the right word, but it's going to be a lot harder without that mental shift, for sure.
Yeah. And from the perspective of teaching, like cultivating courage is every bit as important as teaching somebody how to draw, you know, like you have to, and that's the thing. If people are listening to this, and, you know, I know the people who listen to your podcast are emerging and aspiring artists and more, I'm sure, but, you know, this is absolutely doable, right? You can learn how to draw, you can learn how to paint. And even if, none of us are, some of us maybe, but I'm never going to catch up to Michelangelo or Da Vinci,
right,
or Sargent, you know, like I'm not part of any huge art movement that is going to be a little picture in a history book or anything, right? I know that. But, I'm absolutely doing what I love and making it, in the sense of, I don't have another job where I support myself, which even if that's the case, that's not a problem either. Like I know a lot of people who have, they have some sort of other income and they're also an artist,
Yeah.
but that belief that if you just keep going, you're going to get better at this. It's just how it works. And it goes that way with the actual professional side of it too. So there's like the skill side, and there's you can say developing your ability to create better and better and better artwork. And then there's the other side, which is getting it in front of people so that there's some income from that. Right.
Yep.
And, if you devote your time as evenly as possible to both, you're eventually going to be really good at both of them. Right. It's just going to take some time. So like any skill, it takes a while to develop them.
Yeah. And the learning curve is always there. And I think a lot of times if we have the right mindset initially too, a lot of people want to see success like this. They want it just to be like this upward trend where it's just this straight line, this easy, steady.
Like the stock market pictures, right? It's just always going up and to the right.
Right. And then, but the reality is you zoom in on what's happened and it's like this, there's ups and downs, and there's some big downs and some big spikes, big breakthroughs. And
there's a lot of Monday mornings in there.
Right. Yeah. But overall, you keep at it, and that trajectory, that line is there. But it's that day-to-day struggle and triumph that you have to work through and get through. But if you have that mindset from the beginning that, there's going to be some ugly in this, and there's going to be some failing and some flopping. But ultimately, if I can stick with it and I can trust the process, it's going to work out. Yeah. So mindset is so important. It's interesting when you're talking about the galleries and how you were with them, and then when COVID kind of hit and you had that realization and that mentor who helped you to realize that you could pretty much do it yourself. What at that point did you start to do that you hadn't been doing before to promote your career?
Just the basics. And, if you read any, business startup book, they pretty much all say the same thing, right? You've got to start answering your emails. You've got to start a newsletter. I think that's one of the biggest things about, that's bad about working with the gallery, is that you don't ever really have a customer list. Yep. And they have the customer lists, right? And that's their business, and that's why they're successful or not. And so they don't give you that customer list if they sell to somebody else or go out of business, like they were never your customers. So I think that understanding that, that the main thing that you need to understand in order to succeed in any business is you've got to find a way to love your customers, right? And if you don't even know their names or who they are, you don't have a business at all. You just have, really you're kind of just, it's a weird system, because the galleries aren't even your customer. Right. Because they don't pay you until your work sells. So you're really, you're in some never land that it just isn't a great spot to be, because all you ever get is money, right? You never get, connections. You never get reviews. The best you can get is some recognition, maybe from magazines, or if you know the right galleries and you get into the right shows. But you never have that relationship with people that honestly makes life better and makes business doable. So, and that's partly my temperament too. Like I've talked to people who are very successful in galleries, artists, and they want nothing to do with posting or blogging or however it is that people find people who are interested in purchasing their art. They don't want anything to do with it. They want to finish their painting and send it off to the gallery and get their check and do it again. Like that's what they want. I really I really like the people who purchase my paintings. I know them, I know, almost, every single name I would recognize of all the paintings that I've sold, and their ongoing relationships. Some of them have passed away, like these are people that I've known, and so I love that. I love knowing those people. So I think the biggest shift is just understanding that until you have customers and a way for new customers to get in touch with you and stay in touch with you, you really you don't have a business at all. So
yeah, that's extremely valuable. So I'm curious as far as like specifics, maybe how do you feel like you cultivate like an email list? I know you have you've been doing really well with social media. I think you have over 100,000 followers on Instagram now. What does that look like on like a weekly basis? How are you working, structuring your time around that? Love to hear it.
So I have a lot of to-do lists. and everything that gets done gets a green highlighter, and everything that didn't get done gets a pink highlighter. So that's kind of, I write everything down that needs to be done and try to categorize it between the really urgent and the not so urgent, and answer all emails winds up on the list like every single week, every single day, and you never get to it all, but talking to people, it's just, that's really all those ways of communicating are just that, you're just sharing what you do, and then trying your best to continue any conversations that start, and obviously the bigger the group grows, the harder it is to keep up with every single conversation. But that's the goal, and so I think of it that way. And you have all these sort of non-helpful terms like followers or audience or even customers, and really, if you can treat people like friends, treat them like individuals, and show them that you do in fact care about them and what they're looking for and what they need, that goes for students and collectors. That's going to be huge in just the disposition. Like, you're really trying to bless people, not use them. And there's like lots of weird thinking around business, and I think we've all kind of swallowed the crooked salesman view of the world. Like everybody's trying to sell you something you don't need, and that's not really true. Like most of the time, we're happy to buy the things that we buy, and it's the same with art. I've purchased art, and I would never trade it back for the money that I spent on it. I'm very happy to have that painting or that drawing. So I don't know. I kind of, lost the thread of your question there a little bit. So.
No, it's more just along the lines of if you have any kind of system in place, or for me, like I feel like I always have this list, and it sounds like you're similar. Like I have a list of things that I have to get done, and it's like the ones that are screaming the loudest are the ones that get addressed. And especially as the audience grows, or as things have progressed in the career, trying to maintain relationships, and getting to those questions, comments, messages that people are sending. I'm just curious if you've structured your time in a way to help yourself, to manage that more effectively, or if it's just kind of like what I'm doing, which isn't very admirable, or it gets done, but it's all in like kind of this haphazardly way,
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I think that there's sort of the day falls into three categories. It falls into, I try to set aside time for growth, and that's where I'm learning and building and, just trying to get better at what I do. Right. And so it's not something that is going to be immediately helpful necessarily. It's sort of like that long-term focus where I'm working toward a goal of some sort. I try to
Yeah.
have that as the first part of the day. And then there's definitely the firefighting part of the day where you're just, like you said, you're just trying to deal with the thing that's it's the squeaky wheel section where these things legitimately need to be done. And unless you can hire somebody to do them for you, in some cases, you can, they just have to be done. And then, if it's a good day, and then I paint, right? And so like, I never paint before, I mean, hardly ever paint before, 1:30, 2:00 in the afternoon, right? I never paint first. I kind of get all of the other stuff done and then I paint.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just finished a big painting for me anyway. It was like 66 inches wide and 54 inches tall. And it took up
That's easy.
yeah. And, and I say that cause I keep a record of when I start and stop each painting session. And, you'll look down the list of starts and it's, 1, 2, 3, 3:30, sometimes 4:00 before I started work on that one, and just do it every day and finished it and on to the next one.
Yeah, that's incredible. I find it really interesting how, as I'm doing these interviews with so many different artists and talking about how they work, their schedules, things like that, and I'm always just surprised at how different there are, like how many different approaches there are to it. But it comes down to just consistency more than anything. You figure out what's working for you. And as long as there's that consistent making, that consistent time, whatever that looks like, that's the key. Whether you're starting at 1 or 2 p.m. or 4 a.m., each morning before the family gets up or whatever that is.
Right.
That's really interesting. I love to hear that. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit. I would love to hear a little bit about your process. I know I'm assuming you go out and do plein air painting still. I know with being a landscape artist, but also with animals. I've seen some of your beautiful little studies that you've made. Like how do you go from those studies? Are you taking photographs as well, and then to studio pieces? What's your process like?
Yeah, I don't plein air paint very often now. And a big part of the reason is because I'm sort of dislocated from my landscape right now. So I go on plein air painting trips, And yeah, I have painted here, and every time I go to the beach, I'm like, I'd really like to paint this, but you have four little kids at the beach. You're pretty much on
Occupied.
keep the kids alive duty there.
I
So
know. I get it.
yeah, yeah, it is terrifying, man. It is terrifying. Um, it'll be it'll be nice when all the frontal cortexes are a little bit more developed. Cause and effect is a little bit more firmly grasped. But anyway,
how old are your kids? Just a general range.
10 to 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're
We have similar, but we're 16 to 2. So that's where we're at. So
okay, but it's a 16-year-old girl, so she's like, as mature as a 25-year-old man, right?
In so many ways, you are absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's true. Very helpful. Yeah.
So anyway, what I've done is I just have hundreds of plein air studies that I keep in my studio closet on a bookshelf, and am constantly going through them. And they kind of ground my colors and values. And also they're kind of like a journal, and I remember what the air felt like, what the light felt like on that day. And so they help me, I think, keep the realism that I'm after for the most part. So I never go through a studio piece without going through pretty much all of them, looking for anything that I can find in there that's going to be a clue to how to resolve something in the painting. So that's one thing. That's kind of where it starts. But then the process, I've taken thousands and thousands of pictures, and I get in Photoshop, and I compose and compose and compose until I'm happy with my composition. You can do the same thing with Sketchbook, and but Photoshop's just a much more powerful tool for me to be able to see what it's going to look like, to think of color and value. And obviously you can make it tiny, and then you can zoom in. Honestly, it feels like I can get where I'm going a lot faster than if I were to try to sketch it out. So nothing against sketches, but I do use Photoshop a lot now. And from there, once I'm really happy with the design, I just get it on the canvas, and then, the process, which I really like, and I teach this. You want to know what your design is going to be. There can be a little bit of mystery in how the colors and the edges and some of the different elements are going to develop. But like, if you don't get your design right, then probably it's not as good as it could be. Maybe you'll get lucky, but definitely if something goes wrong, there's almost nothing you can do to save it, right? So you could use it. Your drawing can be horrible, your colors can be horrible, your values can be all over the map, and you can fix all those things over the course of a painting. I'm not saying that that's ideal, but you can still fix all those things. But if your design isn't well thought out, I mean, basically you would just have to paint another painting over that painting, right? And so if you can, but I mean, and I have this tendency, and I see this a lot with people, like, horizon lines that are dead center, subjects that are dead center, everything's sort of static and boring. The sky, the mountains, and the land all take up equal spaces on the painting. And it's just a lot of very sort of common design flaws that you really want to get out of your composition before you start. So whether you're doing that in Sketchbook or Photoshop, either works. So I have that. And then from there, it's I do an underpainting where I just get the design on the canvas, as I planned. And I think that's one of the things I stress for myself and everybody that I can teach too, is just, don't leave behind your good design, right? Don't start your painting and just sort of abandon all the hard work that you just did coming up with a good composition. Make sure that I like to say, do a master copy, right? You like going to the Met and, going through all the hoops to be able to set up and do a master copy of Rembrandt, and then paying no attention to the Rembrandt painting. You're just kind of doing your own thing, right? So if you're there to do a master copy of Rembrandt, my guess is you're really going to be studying Rembrandt. Same thing with your original composition. If it's good, stay with it. Don't kind of leave it behind. Obviously, you can make little shifts if you see something better, but that should be like a decision. Oh, I could make this better here. Not, well, I wasn't paying attention and I accidentally put that horizon line right back in the middle, So, and then I usually do a transparent oxide red wash, like everybody, a lot of people do that, right? And just get the,
I don't.
You don't? Okay. You do white canvas.
No, I do a wash, but it's not transparent oxide red. So that's, I just do a mix of burnt umber with a little bit of ultramarine blue to knock it down, so it's not so hot.
Do you gray?
It's definitely warm, but it's a little bit more neutral. So
gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to each his own, right?
Right.
It's working for you. I was painting on straight white canvases for a long while. And then I got a hold up there. I got a hold of Scenic Journey, the book of Edgar Payne's work. And you can just see those hot orange washes underneath his paintings. And I was just like, this looks really, really good. I'm going to try this. And, it's just worked really well. So whatever works there. I like to tone my canvases transparent oxide red, draw out the composition, and then just lightest light, darkest dark, and one shape at a time until it's covered. And then I just ask what bothers me the most and fix that one thing until the painting's finished. That's the process.
That's awesome. So you said lightest light and darkest dark. Are you setting those in like immediately when you start the painting?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that way you're just able to gauge your values and relate them to that.
A lot of paintings, when I would start them so before I got here, I would start them with those really light washes of color, and there would be these really great, brush strokes and interesting things that happen in that first layer that I would really like. And they were the wrong value. So I had to get rid of all of them, right? None of them could stay till the end. And so what I've learned is I want to go for accurate value immediately.
Yeah.
Because hopefully some of those brushy, thin strokes that are really interesting mark making and can give my painting a lot of depth, hopefully they can stay all the way to the signature. If you put those washy, interesting brush strokes in at the wrong value, at some point you're going to have to cover it up completely, right? Unless you're doing a vignette or something like that, where the value doesn't matter in that section of the painting. But for border to border, corner to corner painting, if it's the wrong value, it's got to go, right? And I go for accurate value right away, because I don't want to lose the depth in my painting that having that way down deep layer that shows through in places gives me. Yeah,
I like that. To me, that's setting yourself up for success, and really just not wasting time. I think there's been so many times. Yeah, so many times when I've got some awesome brush stroke, or just like you're saying, this passage that I just love, and then when it all comes together, it's like it's just not reading right, because the value's off, or a temperature or whatever, but typically it's going to be value, and you have to redefine it. You have to paint over it. You have to change it so that it reads correctly. And that's always really frustrating. So it sounds like a solid way to do it. Just get those two high and low point, in the value spectrum, where they need to be. That makes absolute sense. That's a great takeaway. So I wanted to go back when I use Photoshop a lot too. In fact, I created a course that's just Photoshop for artists. And because it's such a powerful tool, and it's just like, I like you said, you can go through the same process with a sketchbook or something like that. But to me, having that capacity to make something bigger, I can change so many things so fast in Photoshop, resize. What does your process look like when you're doing the Photoshop compositions? Like just a typical composition that you're coming up with. I'd love to hear how you approach it.
Well, usually it'll be somewhat based on a key photo, right? So there's a picture that I took that I really, really like, and I'm just looking for a way, but I have to identify the element. Maybe it's a tree, or maybe it's a foreground shadow. I mean, it could be anything that I really like about the source photo, and it's just, how do I make this work in a composition? So I'll start a folder and just start going through the photographs that I have, and I list them by date, and I also give sort of a tag to where I was and what the pictures are of, so I can go through them all, sort of this huge, library of files. And I just go through them, and anything that I feel like would be a good fit with that painting, I'll put in the folder, and then eventually just bring it into Photoshop and start doing, it sounds, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, I know you are, but maybe somebody listening, it's not really that complicated. I just do layer masks, which mean that I can basically easily erase, say, the whole background from one image, or whatever, and create these layers where, I just keep one element from each picture. It's kind of, it's the same as sort of a photo, you're cutting pictures out of a magazine and kind of pasting it all together. But again, you can control scale and value and color temperature and all that sort of thing. So I get there and just land on something that I like. Sometimes I'll actually find paintings that I find particularly inspiring by some master and superimpose them over my composition to see if my composition is lining up. Maybe I could adjust some things and move some things over. I do that. So I'll incorporate, my favorite painters into my composition process in a way that no one would ever be able to tell, I don't think, and so that's one thing that's part of the process too, is I'll never stop looking at great paintings. Like it is the most inspiring thing every single day, whether it's on Instagram or in a book, or, obviously a treat whenever you can go to a museum or an auction or a gallery show or anything like that. So anyway, where I'm going with that is in Photoshop, and then I get this sort of composite, and that's usually when I'll kind of save it. I'll flatten all the layers and save it, and then I'll start really playing with the colors and the value. Once it's a more cohesive thing, try to bring it together all into a harmony. Look at it in black and white, look at it small, flip it around, see if I accidentally designed something that would be better mirrored, really be thorough with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I find myself doing very similar things, especially with that flipping it. You look at it black and white, but then you reverse it. And to me, that's one of my, the ways that I I see if the composition is working as I flip it. And if it still feels like it's a solid composition, whether it's, mirrored, one way or the other, I feel a lot more confident in its ability to read well for somebody else. And yeah, sometimes I do. I love it more as I flip it. I'm like, wow, that has a whole different energy, different feel. And then and then paint it from that. That's neat. And I love the fact that you're imposing, and I'm assuming it's more just the compositional design from a master painter or something like that you're looking at to kind of get maybe similar shapes. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Or
the lines, the shapes, but color harmony too sometimes, it really depends on the problem that I'm trying to solve there. And so a lot of the time, sometimes I'm more thorough and sometimes I'm less, right? But the folder where I'm putting the source photos, I'll also try to drop some paintings that can particularly inspire that. My teacher, Brian Jekyll, in college had this saying, whatever problem you're trying to solve in a painting, someone else has already solved. If you're trying to paint an eye, someone has already solved the problem of how to paint an eye well. Go find who that person is and basically copy their solution, right? And so I'm stretching back a long while here, and obviously I've reinterpreted that to myself, but it's almost like the law, right? There's some case that's been made, like the case that you're trying to make. Go figure out who made the case and how they succeeded in that, right? So, when I was first, I paint quite a few. I paint sheep a lot right now, and really enjoy it. You can see my sheep skulls up there. They're just they're fun animals to paint. I know you do some as well, and so the first people that I'm looking at, of course, are Carl Rungus and Bob Kuhn, and I'm looking for buffalo and any other woolly, scruffy looking thing to try and figure out how on earth you paint wool, right? So they end up in the inspiration folders for whatever piece, and I look at them a lot. I have some of their books too, but you can find high res pictures. So that's how I use Photoshop. I come up with a composition that way. And I actually, my source, I like to print a lot of black and white pictures and then look at I have an iPad over by my easel for color. So, and then I get all my plein airs out and I put them all on the floor underneath my easel and I try not to drip on them. And looking at those, I'm looking at my black and white pictures. If I need them, I have some anatomy books out, definitely. When painting animals, if I have access, I've got more skulls in the closet. I'm looking at their bones, trying to figure out what they actually look like as opposed to what I think they look like. And it really helps to be able to put my hands on that too, to feel the planes. Yeah. I have it's a fake human skull, but it was something I used a lot when I was doing portraits. And I would draw it, I would have it out, I would try to light it the same way that I was, as my source. And it's really, really helpful to always kind of have that, the resources on both sides, what you know and what you see, right? You're always trying to use those two in a balancing act. You want to paint what you know and paint what you see. And you need to let what you know inform what you see, and you need to let what you see inform what you know. And so that's the process. But Photoshop, layer masks, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you kind of get those basics down, it's pretty simple. Yeah.
Also a gallery filter. At the end, I like to put a gallery filter over the whole thing to reduce all the detail so that I'm not tempted to, because you can get into trouble because when you're putting things,
noodle.
Well, noodling's okay as long as it's as it's something that you think the painting needs, right? But
Right.
if it's detail from one photograph and you're painting the detail from one photograph and there's detail from another photograph, right? Because we're putting photographs together,
Yep.
maybe, the structure is okay, especially once you've adjusted the colors and the value, but probably the details are going to need to come from what you understand, and also um, your plein airs, right? That's going to be a better place to, or even just looking at masterpieces too, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's a really great process. Thank you for sharing that. I love the idea of having a physical object in front of you to help inform what you know.
mhm,
Because a lot of times photographs, they're limiting. They're extremely limiting,
right,
and to not have something physically to reference, or to have the past or history of studying something, you don't know what you don't know.
right,
And maybe there is a plane there, there's in those skulls of these animals, there's turns that you would never know were there
right.
if you couldn't literally physically handle it and manipulate it with your touch and those senses. But the beauty of that is, even if it's just a slight change in maybe, value or temperature, some kind of shift that you're describing there that you're not seeing in your photo, but it makes it more real and more believable because that's going to be closer to reality.
I like to go in
Um,
with a graphite pencil and draw the bones back into my paintings. I like using pencils a lot, and that's, I don't think that he did it that way, but Bob Kuhn, I think, is just one of the best that ever lived, for
yes.
his ability to make something feel like, it. How did he do it? I mean, it's like there's no, they're like this cougar's paw, and it has no edges, but you can feel the weight and the muscle and the bone, like it's this tense creature ready to spring. And
Uh,
it wasn't, he was not copying photographs to get that. Like, there was something that he
right.
knew about how a mountain lion paw looks that he was painting into those paintings. So I think
Yeah.
that's, you kind of start off, you have to start with just painting what you see, right? And
Yeah.
I know that's like a very popular, just paint what you see, just paint what you see, right? But at some point, if you're going to really focus on a certain subject, it helps to know how a tree grows, or, you know, how atmospheric perspective works. You don't have to know anything about atmospheric perspective to see it and paint it, but it sure helps to know that it's there to make sure that you actually see it.
Right. Right. I taught a workshop recently, and part of the conversation we had with this group of artists was, yeah, when you're starting out, you have just that limited foundation, that limited knowledge base that you have to work from. But as time goes on, especially as you develop your career, there's more and more things that are informing the decisions that you're making. And I've found that as the longer I'm painting, the slower and more careful I've become in my work. And I think it has to do with the fact that I have so many things that have accumulated over these years that are informing my decision making. Like, is this temperature right? Is my brush stroke, big enough, or is it similar to all these other brush strokes I've made? I should go bigger, or I should go, so I have all these things that are just kind of poking at my brain. Nope, you need to shift this, or remember that, Mark, don't forget that. Um,
Yeah.
but I think what I love about developing as an artist is the fact that it becomes so much more of a cerebral process over time, and everything we're doing has a purpose. At least from my perspective, it's getting more and more purposeful in the marks that I'm making, and I'm thinking through those things. And in spite of what I may be seeing or not seeing in my reference, I'm just getting what I need from my reference material. But
Right.
I have all these other things going on that are helping me to make choices that are informing. And that's where my voice comes from, and I think now people will see my work, whether it's a painting of a bird, a bison, or a moose, whatever it is, they can tell it's mine because of just the way that I think through my work and the way that I'm processing it. Anyway, do you have any thoughts along that? Like that makes sense to me, but maybe I'm just overthinking.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. And I like to tell people it's, if you're going to build something, you don't go to the hardware store and buy all the wood. You just buy the wood that you need, right? The supplies that you need. When you get sent or go to the grocery store, and you're in the spice aisle, you don't buy one of each. You buy, the sage, if that's what you were sent to get. Right. Or
Right.
if that's why you're there, depending on who's cooking. Right. And so it's like that. It's like that with, even working from life. What are you painting? What is it? What is it that you're trying to create here? And, you don't need to copy everything that you see. You just need to take what you need from the source. Right. So yeah, that's really powerful. And even the idea of, that is something I love to say to myself. I love to say to students whenever I have the chance is there are parts of the painting that you don't want people to look at, right? Which is very counterintuitive, but it's true. You just don't want people to look here, right? You can't cut it out, right, of the panel and have a hole in the painting. So we've got to do a little bit better than just leaving it blank or trying to remove it. But you don't want people there, right? And it's sort of you're using all the elements of the painting to create an eye flow, a journey into, and then back through, and then back through, and then back through endlessly, right? Your painting, right? So every time they look at it, and I love the idea of textures and, maybe an indication of detail. I don't know from anybody if this is true, but I love the idea of painting something into, a painting that makes the whole stronger, but that the people who own the painting and look at it every day will never see. They'll never see it. Or it'll be a year before they notice that there's purple right there in that tree is purple, right? Or something like that, right? It's just, it's something that works for the whole, but isn't going to stop your eye. And I just like the idea of someone living with a painting and sort of discovering it in stages. So absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what are some of the main ways that you try to create a visual flow? And I know that's hard to quantify verbally, but I'd love to hear some of your thought processes around that, and even like focal point creating that kind of movement, the flow, keeping people engaged in your painting visually.
So, I think of this mostly as a landscape painter. Right. Yeah. I don't paint very many portraits. And when you're dealing with portraits, it's different, right? Because of the way the human face commands whatever, you can put somebody's face down at the bottom. And if it's the only face, people, whether it's well composed or poorly composed, people are all going to look there. Right. That's just, there's a face. And it's like a primal, to mandate that we all have to make eye contact with each other at some point, right? Even if it's with a painting. So that, just as a landscape painter, if you're painting for an audience from Western civilization, your viewer is going to start from the upper left-hand corner, because we read everything from the upper left-hand corner down, right? So the entry point, I'm just going to assume for the viewer's eye, is going to be upper left. So that means that, and I also really think that the rule of thirds pretty much sums up what you need to know about how to break up a composition, right? So you just divide the canvas into three from left to right and top to bottom, give yourself those four intersections,
Yeah.
and you're going to want your center of interest somewhere on one of those. I like usually the bottom right. Not always. I'm gonna like look around, and it's not always. Sometimes top right, sometimes top left, right? But to
Yeah.
force the viewer to come through the painting before they get to the center of interest. Now, it can work to have the center of interest right away. You just have to have a good way to bring the viewer back so they don't go to the center of interest and then exit the painting as they look at the painting, right? You want to make sure that you get them back. So the viewer's eye comes in the upper left-hand corner. And I think of the focus of a painting and the center of interest as being two different things. So the focus of a painting is what you're painting. And again, I'm thinking of this as a landscape painter. If I'm painting the sky is going to take up most of the composition. If I'm painting the mountain's going to take up most of the composition. If I'm painting the field's going to take up most of the composition, right? If I'm painting,
Yeah.
you know, there can be a barn in the painting, but if it's a painting of the sky, the barn's going to be small and the sky's going to be big. And that scale, and always making sure that you don't have three even distributions, right? You always want whatever you're focused on to have the largest mass, and then you want to make sure that the supporting masses are different from each other in scale too. So there's really a large, medium, and small in your composition, right? And that saves from sort of boring, evenly weighted three, shapes in your painting, which can happen to you when you're using the rule of thirds because you're dividing your canvas into three even shapes,
Right.
essentially, when you do that. So it's very easy to just be like, I'll put this here, I'll put this here, and I'll put that there, right? You don't want to do that. You want to make sure from the very beginning something's larger and then the other two are also different from each other. The center of interest, for me, is not necessarily the focus of the painting. I always think of it as kind
Yeah.
of like the lowest point where all the water eventually goes to, right? So your viewer's eye
Okay.
is going to trickle through the painting and eventually come to that
Settle.
lowest point, settle in that center of interest. And so it can be an edge. It can be a value contrast. Their eye is just going to go there, and they won't necessarily know why their eye is there because it's not necessarily the most interesting thing about the painting, but you're using it to regroup the viewer's eye and then send them back through the painting. And so
Interesting.
I think of lines, a lot, arrows. I like to think of them as eye funnels, like those gathering places where, the viewer's eye is just going to come to that one point because of the way that you've set up the angles. And you think of it just like a funnel or an arrow. It's really, it's incredibly straightforward and really successful. A lot of it comes from thumbnailing the masters. So if you have an artist that you really like, I would say, definitely get their work and just do thumbnail sketches of it. It's like having a conversation. Like if you want to know, like if you want to know how Shishkin composed tree scenes, go ask him, right? And sit down with a
Right.
piece of paper and he'll tell you, right? He'll tell you
Yeah.
exactly how he did it over and over and over again. You'll begin to spot similarities, right? You'll see what he's doing again and again. They're kind of like the central tenets of how he thought a painting should be composed. And again, he'll tell you, right? And then you can take it
Yeah.
or leave it, but it's not a mystery anymore. And so
Yeah.
that's helped my work a lot, and I started that with T. Allen Lawson. I just did a bunch of thumbnail sketches of his paintings. And that was when I was like, oh, there is something to this rule of thirds thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
because his paintings, the compositions feel so dynamic, and they are, but pretty faithful to the rule of thirds. Not always, but you know,
Wow.
a very consistent. So anyway, and same with Josh Elliott. I actually got to go to his studio and see his work, and he draws third. He was at that time drawing thirds right on his canvases, and he has very dynamic and beautiful compositions as well. So it's really
Yeah.
just kind of taking the basics and thoroughly understanding them. That's my take on composition in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. Man. So I think a lot about the thirds. I also think about like the golden ratio. Do you ever use that one too? Or is it mostly
Mhm.
thirds that you're focusing on?
Sometimes golden ratio, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
basically where, it's I kind of give myself like that space between a third and the golden ratio, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you overlap them, that's kind of, if you're thinking just, should I put that horizon line right on the third, or can I raise it a little bit or lower it a
Yeah.
little bit? Thinking of the golden
Yeah.
ratio, yeah, you have that wiggle room.
Yeah. I like to hear that. Sometimes I think, I don't know. I think about other people who might be listening to this and be like, well, what about the golden ratio? And it's like, so to me, it's like, I had to ask the question, but I have this layer that I've created in Photoshop when I'm composing, and it just has those intersections highlighted with some lines. It has the thirds, but also the golden ratio it takes it off. But to me, it's just nice having that as a layer over everything, so that as I'm figuring things out, I don't get too far away from kind of those key points.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes sense to me to do it that way. So I love to hear how other artists utilize that. So thank you
I
for
just
sharing
use the
that.
crop tool in Photoshop that gives you the thirds.
Oh yeah, yeah, that works too.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I never even thought
Yeah,
about putting a layer, but that's a good idea, because then I just like slide the guides over and down, and then I have the guides. But yeah, that's a good idea to just have a layer, because then you can constantly make it skinnier or taller or whatever you have to do, and it'll all stay the same.
exactly, because those ratios are always the same. So yeah, that's the beauty, is I can resize it to whatever format I have, and it works really, really nice. So that's something I should add to my Photoshop course. I
I was
should
gonna
do
say,
that.
is that in the course?
It needs to be.
Yeah.
Writing a note right now. All right. So let's shift gears a little bit here, Tim. Um, I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience with um, the teacher that you had at Pensacola Christian College. Is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Brian Jekyll, is that his name?
That's right.
Okay. So, did he become kind of a mentor to you, or what was that? What was that like?
Um, I wouldn't say particularly. We've kept in touch over the years, but um, you know, I I don't know if I've definitely shown in my work over the years, and we've had that conversation. I don't know if quite as intense as mentorship, you
Okay.
know, but that's partly my disposition. So,
Yeah. So, have you had people that have been mentors? What What's your experience there?
um, I would say I've learned a lot from looking at contemporary artists' work, and every single time I've approached one, they've been very generous with their knowledge, and have given me some feedback on my work. And you know one in particular, CW Mundy, has just been great. He's I haven't spoken to him in quite some time, but he's just eager to share what he's learning, and what a lot he already knows. And so that's something that I've found across the whole representational art world. Even if you can think of the most famous representational artist, whoever that is in your head, most of them are really down to earth, normal people who are just like you, just creating artwork and doing it professionally. That's really, there isn't that sort of elite, you know, um, there's no Taylor Swift of the representational art world, right?
Yeah.
where they're going to get mobbed in Macy's. It's just isn't going to happen.
Right. Right. I think that's true. I've found the exact same thing as I've reached out to other artists. Everybody has been very, very generous and helpful.
Yeah.
And I love that aspect of being a part of this career. Really grateful for that. You are teaching, and you do. It sounds like you have online courses that you've created, but you also do. Do you do in-person stuff, or is it kind of like a digital format? What is your teaching like? What does that look like for people listening?
Yeah, I have a platform called the Art Journey, and it's it's an online community where there are courses available. There's a membership where I teach weekly and give feedback on artwork. A couple of other artists on there with me, and so it's really just, it's designed right now, at least. The courses are designed to give a really intense focus on one aspect of the landscape or something else. And I have another artist who teaches portraits and still life, right? And then the weekly meetings are, really trying to continue to teach, because it can't, even if you have a really extensive course, you just can't teach everything in a course, right? So it's just sort of filling everything in and rehearsing, all the big principles that need to be rehearsed, and then also cultivating that practice of just painting. If you paint every week, and you take Christmas and Thanksgiving off, you're gonna paint 50 times this year, right? And so that's one of the things that I'm really wanting for my members, is just that routine of painting. So it's the Art Journey, and that's where I teach. I don't really travel or go to workshops or anything like that anymore. So it's a lot better. I can reach a lot more people just teaching online.
Yeah, that's really neat. How long have you been doing that?
Since, I guess 2 years. 2 years.
Okay. So is this platform, this community, did you create this personally?
The Art Journey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. And it sounds like you've collaborated with some other artists to make that work. That's really
right.
neat.
Yeah. Artists, it's that's why, I think that I can provide a lot richer an education over the long haul if I have a lot of other artists, because my skill set is limited, right? I'm just there,
right.
I only know so many things. So the more teachers I can have, the better it'll be.
You can dishwash. We know that, right?
Right. Not very well.
Maybe your wife would attest to that.
Yeah. I mean, I do pretty well if I have all the time in the world. So, I still wash dishes, but the whole trying to wash dishes quickly was not my jam.
Yeah. I'm curious. Speaking of dishes and family life, how do you balance the painting and the family life? Like, how do you find that balance, and if you do?
Yeah, I don't. I don't really think that balance exists or is possible. I think that you can have priorities, and you can prioritize what's important, and that's the best you can do, right? And so I just try to prioritize what is important, and obviously spending time with the kids is really important, and so there's a certain point at which I have to be done not because I've reached it or done in the studio, done painting or done working on the computer or whatever it is I'm doing. Not because I'm balanced, but just because, there's another priority that I need to address. I need to see to. And it's easier for me to do it that way because the whole concept of balance is just, it's too elusive. Like I have no idea what that even means. I think,
Yeah.
life is a lot of really hard work and doing your very best to spend time doing what's most important. So, but
Yeah.
being an artist and creating artwork is really important. So, but I work from home, so I get to spend breakfast and lunch and dinner with the kids. And during school, I'm the one who always brings them to school. So I
That's
just
awesome.
have parts of the day where it's, this is what I do, and I just try to keep that routine. I love the idea of routines and rituals and traditions and that sort of thing, just
Yeah.
because the more you can build that, or the more I can build that into my life, the more I can focus on what's important. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my work-life balance.
That's
Doesn't
awesome.
exist.
I agree with that in so many ways. I think, yeah, balance is kind of this elusive concept, and it sounds like it's just romantic, this romantic idea of what my life could be, and yet day in day out, it's a pretty raw, rough process. Um, but I love that, and having routines, habits, rituals that you kind of go through and do that get kind of guarantees that yes, you are spending this amount of time with your kids at these times, in these ways. And whether that's quality, that's one thing, but at least you have the opportunity to create that because that you're scaffolded and you're set up to make that happen. Is that, would you agree with how I said that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If um, you know, if it's just a lot easier to follow a daily a daily ritual, a daily tradition, a daily habit than it is to understand what balance means.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I like that. Um, so going back a little bit to your online education stuff, as far as finances and making a living as an artist, how big is that the educational aspect of what you do to your financial success?
yeah, it's very important, I would say. I definitely, it's definitely an income. I say that teaching for me, though, is more because I want to teach, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like there's something about teaching, and this goes all the way back. I even, at one time was considering trying to get back into school and get a little bit more education so I could teach it at college, because there's something about transferring information and even the idea of time, right? So like if I can take a year off your journey by giving you this information, like I'm giving you time, I'm giving you
Yeah.
knowledge, but people, when they take your knowledge, and it becomes theirs, it's theirs, right? And their paintings don't look like your paintings, at least not for long, right?
Right. Yep.
And so I love that, and I also love, um, it's the selfish part of teaching where, I've got a lot of sharp, smart people with smart questions and concerns and things, and I'm like, I've never thought of that. I've never ever thought of that, right? Or
Yeah.
even just anticipating what they might think or say. And so that's that. When you're the teacher, you're sort of the chief learner.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
having taught for the last couple of years pretty regularly, I mean, it feels like I know 100% more about painting than I did before I started, because when you're when you're just painting for yourself, which isn't a problem, I may go back to that someday, but you can kind of work off the little that and grow it a little bit at a time. But when you're constantly trying to distribute everything to everybody at every skill level, when they have, when they're with their problems and their paintings, and even just giving feedback on, it has to be, I have to have looked at 1,000 paintings. I feel like it has to be more. I've just looked at so many paintings and given feedback on values and color harmony and composition. It just really, really helps me understand what I'm doing even better. And so I think that, if you look at the sort of pinnacle of that in my mind, it's got to be Richard Schmid, who just, he is his own art movement, right? There's so many people who are so inspired, so many of the best representational painters that are painting right now, like they definitely learned how to do what they're doing from Schmid, and so there's a lot of variety, but there's a lot of things that are similar. And of course, all the things, the books and the DVDs back in the day, the DVDs, just the VHSs, right? Actually, the first Schmid things I ever saw were VHSs in the school library, right?
That's hilarious.
So just saying that I could be wrong, but I think that constant teaching all through his life and career is one of the things that made his work just always so strong, right?
Yeah.
You didn't really see, at least, you're looking at a whole body of work, there'd be people who have their favorite time period of any artist who painted for 50 years, right? So you just see transitions, and not everybody's going to love one transition to another, but you just see like a continuing strength in his work. So anyway, that's kind of what I aspire to with the teaching. Like it's just part of knowing something. And then I think it's just, it's part of, for me, it's part of living the good life. Like I really want to teach. So
yeah, that's something, as I've started this podcast and create some online content, and after teaching some workshops too, I'm finding that same thing. I was actually a high school art teacher for 8 years, and before I went full time in 2018. But what's interesting is if I had to go back to the high school scene as a teacher, I would be kicking and screaming and dragging my feet, and I don't want to go back to that arena personally. I just don't think that's a good fit for me. But with what I'm doing now and how I'm integrating education into what I'm doing, I'm finding so much more meaning in it. And I think ultimately, if you're finding meaning in what you're doing as an artist, that's gonna give you fuel to keep that longevity. For me, I don't know how to even describe it. And it's just, sometimes you just hit these walls and it's like, why am I even doing this? And I go to these art shows and I'm creating paintings for people I don't know, never met, and trying to and that's exciting too. But there's an aspect of just like, it's so far out of my realm in so many ways, or it just doesn't feel right. I don't know how else to say it. Some of it just doesn't make sense to me when it comes down to how meaningful it really is. And so as I've started to do more education and creating some of this content, the podcast and everything, I feel it's like it's filling a gap in my life of meaning with my art. And I feel like now, like, not that I'm the best teacher out there, not that I'm the most incredible educator. I have a long way to go, and I'm extremely limited, even with what I know as an artist. But as I'm sharing what I do know and the experiences I've had and helping others to grow it from where they're at, it's powerful. And I think that there comes a certain point in anybody's career where unless there's some way of giving back, there's going to be something empty. And I don't know necessarily what that even looks like for everybody, but it's just fundamentally deep down. I just like, there has to be this passing on, this pushing it forward, moving things forward for the next group, for the next set, and saving somebody time, shrinking that learning curve, helping them to work through or even avoid a potential pitfall that, man, I feel like I had to just go through the trenches with to figure out.
Right.
That's just powerful stuff. So I really resonate with what you said there. I don't think it's the easier path. I think it would be easier just to sit in my studio and paint for me. But man,
that sounds so boring.
I honestly, I have to agree.
Yeah.
And I just turned 40 this year.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. And I still feel like I'm like 22, because that's where I feel like I am mentally, at least, like a 16-year-old girl. Right?
Yeah, right.
But I'm already kind of hitting that wall where it's like, I need just something that's a bit more meaningful to be working for and working towards. And it is incredible too that when you are teaching something, how it, like you said, the teacher is the chief learner. If you're going to be able to share something or explain something in a way that's understandable to somebody who has a limited knowledge base, you have to know it so well, and usually from multiple angles, so that you can hit it at the right angle for them to understand it, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
there's a part of it for us as representational artists that is absolutely the love of the craft, right? Like,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
love this craft. I love triads. I love color wheels. I mean, I don't just like them. I love them, right? Like I'm a total nerd, right? And
Yeah.
so having that, and then having a bunch of other people who also, at whatever level they find themselves, love this craft. It doesn't matter if they're just starting out and they're learning how to use their brushes, or if they're better than I am. Like, we have this in common. And I think that's part of the, part of the reason I love to teach and talk and share and meet people who are interested, do this sort of thing, is because I think one of the things that really I knew I would hate about being an artist was how lonely it looked like it was going to be to me. Right. So it kind of felt like it was going to be a very solo adventure. And so being able to spend time on internet in person with a bunch of other people who are excited about the same things I'm excited about, that's another really powerful part of being a teacher, being an artist.
Yeah, I think that it is lonely being an artist, and it's so important that we do find that connection with other artists, other people. Yeah, it's absolutely essential to keep this thing rolling as a profession, I think. Let's kind of wrap it up here, Tim. If you could go back and give yourself some advice on, something that you think would actually really help you, 10, 15 years ago, when you were still pretty new at this whole thing, what would you do? What would you say?
Honestly, I would pick a few business books and give them to myself and say, read these. Like the craft and the adventure of being an artist. It's been awesome. The A lot of the well, there's a lot of deep and you know painful frustration in being a craftsperson, being an artist, period. Right. And
Yep.
so that I don't, it still is, right? It still is some of these paintings, right? They're
Absolutely.
just not what they could have been. Right. And, so there's always that. And so if I were to go back in time, you know, I wouldn't really be able to say very much that would help me with that because it's like, yeah, there's more of that. But
Yeah.
maybe the thought, right? I think we're sort of indoctrinated with the idea that painting is a gift, like a gift that you're given. Like there's the artistic gift, and the longer I paint, the less I believe that it is a gift, right? And partly because I'm a teacher, and
Yeah.
I just believe that you can learn how to do this. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, unless you get hit on the head really hard or something happens to your hands and you can't hold a brush. I mean, there are things that could happen that would make it
Right.
very difficult for you to paint, but um you're not going to like suddenly lose your ability to paint because you overslept or something, right? And I feel like there
Yeah.
was kind of like that sort of constantly freaked out, and so when paintings weren't going very well, it's sort of like, oh man, I'm losing it, I can't figure out, I can't remember. It's all just getting really good at drawing value edges and color and learning how to compose well. That's it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a knowledge base that you build and a skill set that you develop. And over time, if you keep with it, it gets really uniquely yours. And then people just line up to tell you how gifted you are. And it's not a gift. It's something that you have to develop any more than getting really fit or any other thing that takes a lot of work. It's a gift to be alive. It's a gift to be safe. It's a gift to live in the wealthiest civilization in the history of the entire world. I mean, there are lots of things
Yeah.
about being in my seat that are a gift, but you know being an artist, being a craftsperson, just keep working at it, and try not
Yeah.
to get too frustrated. And then, just understanding that in life, every single person is, I would say, at some level, maybe this is not true. There's some profession that I'm not aware of, but they're selling goods and services, right? And most of us grow up with the model, at least in the middle class, that, getting a job and having a job is the thing, right? Go to
Yeah.
college and get a job, right?
Yeah.
And as an artist, if you try to treat the business end like a job where you're putting in your hours, it's not going to be, I think, very helpful because you are creating goods, right? And if
Yep.
you can understand it that way, you're not ever going to get paid for your time. You're
Right.
always going to get paid for selling not your time, but your products, right? And
Yep.
invariably, if you're working for a business and they're paying you for your time because you're helping them make their products or sell their products or something, but they're actually selling products, not time, right?
Yeah.
So as an artist, that just means that the pipeline from the product creation to the income is that product has to sell, right?
Yeah.
And you can either pay somebody else to do it or you can do it yourself. Those are the two options.
Yep.
And I think in the gallery world, for the world of the artist, the paying somebody else to do it option is like just about as bad a deal as you can get. Like it's right up there with the cash advance places. when you get the
Right.
weekend loans at 40% or whatever, like it's
Yeah.
a really, really bad deal for the artist. So
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like in the future, if we all band together and do something different, or, we're all just going it alone. I'm not sure, but I think that that's something I would go back and tell myself. And, the whole, if you get into the right gallery, you're going to have a successful art career is just not true.
Yeah. I like that. And then one other thing I would ask is, with the audience in mind, aspiring emerging artists, one or two things that you see beginners do that is not serving them, or mistakes that you maybe see on a regular basis. What are some things that they could avoid?
You mean like technically in their artwork?
Or in business, or in how they approach social media, whatever that is. I think anything along those lines would be valuable.
Yeah. So two answers. In developing the craft, in business, consistency, and educating yourself, right? Always be learning and try to be open to what you don't know. And I think that's one of the two things that I think the two sayings that really help me in every aspect of my career as an artist are, what does great look like? Right. And so that applies to people who are in business, right? What does great look like? Not does, which of your classmates do you think is doing better? And maybe how could you figure out how to do that? Like, what does great look like? What does actually great look like? And the same goes for art. And I always think of my paintings, like I imagine it's on the easel now, but I imagine that it's hanging in the Met, right? Which I keep referencing the Met because it's just where my favorite paintings are. But Boston Museum of Fine Art, or what's the one in Oklahoma? The Cowboy Museum there with the Prix de West. Like, so imagine it's hanging in the Prix de West. What is going to make people go, what's that doing here? Like, figure out what about your paintings? So you back somebody up and they're looking at the whole wall, like, which one of these paintings doesn't belong here?
Right.
How to make sure that your painting isn't the one that's picked, right? And so what does great look like? What does great look like? And then you don't know what you don't know, right? And so you just have to have an open mind with everything. And there are lots of paradigm shifts, and they're all painful and they're all exciting, and you don't know what you don't know ever. So you just have to keep an open mind. So those two things, they're pretty general, but artists are coming from all sorts of different walks of life and angles. So I think that's kind of my generic, hopefully everybody can get something from that.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's extremely valuable. And I love that perspective. That's something to chew on for a while. And learning how to see your work from an objective standpoint. How am I supposed to make a living with something that people don't resonate with, and having the ability to see, is this good enough to where people can buy this, or are willing to, and ultimately people will demonstrate that with their pocketbooks, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, if you're not selling, it's a good indication that there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen. Or you're not in front of the right people.
A lot of marketing and advertising that needs to happen, right?
Yeah. One of two. That's a two-sided coin for sure.
If they're stuck in a gallery with somebody who can't sell, then that's like again, just one more kick at most of the gallery model. It's like, they put their gallery in a place where, you know, wealthy people walk through, and eventually a wealthy person will trip over your painting and take it home with them. Like, that's pretty much they're kind of ambush salespeople, right? Like, it's just the paintings have to sell themselves, right? Or they, anyway, maybe you can cut that out. I was a little bit too snarky.
No, I think there are galleries like that, and I think I've worked with galleries like that, but I've also worked with, there's one in particular that has done really well for me.
Yeah. And I've worked with a couple like that too. And so
they've been worth the commission price. And it's been so I think there's a time and a place, but I think especially as a professional artist who's trying to make a living and even support a family, that's a very real thing you have to think about and consider. Is it really worth giving them all of that money when I can develop this, and this, and push this and sell it myself, and have all that income come my way, plus the customer? There's give and take there for sure. But it's something that we all have to consider when dealing with the whole gallery aspect of this career. It's a force to be reckoned with for sure. Thank you again, TJ, for your time, and your wisdom, your understanding, your experience. I really appreciate it. And I know a lot of the listeners here are thrilled to learn from you. So that's going to be it for today's podcast, everybody. Happy painting and get to work. We'll see ya. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. If you're interested in resources and education to help you successfully create art and then sell it, please check out the Business of Art course in the link below. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.